Hey everybody, it's Devin again with Mark Advantage. I have the privilege and the honor of being with Scott Lewis of CEO Roundtable, talking to you today just about various leadership topics and just some tips and some practicals to take away, especially during these weird times of the pandemic. So Scott, thank you so much for joining.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me, Devin.
Yeah. So first, I'd just love a quick little introduction of you and talk about your business and what your role is there.
Sure. So I run an organization called the CEO Roundtable, and it's basically an organization where CEOs can get together and close the door. And when we used to be able to do that physically, we close the physical door. Otherwise, we just talk about confidential issues that maybe we can't talk about with anybody else, or we can't expect a straight answer from anybody else. Everybody's got an agenda. And in our groups, our only agenda is to help one another. And so we can do that in a pretty direct, pretty sometimes brutal way. We help one another do things that are difficult, and we hold one another accountable, and we uncover blind spots for one another. So I have 4 groups that meet monthly in about groups of about 10. And that's what we do. I think it's a very, very, I was a member of one of these groups when I was a CEO, and I got a lot out of it. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be able to bring that to other CEOs at any level of experience or any size company.
That's great. So through your different experiences, I guess you probably see a difference between being a manager and a leader. Talk to me about that just a little bit. What is that difference between being a great manager versus being a great leader?
I've got a whole shelf of books over there that talk, define those terms and talk about leadership and management. And so there's some discussion about what each of those terms means, and you can go on ad infinitum about that. To me, a leader has to manage, but a manager doesn't have to lead. So a manager is someone who might have domain experience, who might help somebody do a job that they are able to do themselves and convey knowledge. So I see them sort of as an expert in a subject matter field that and they coordinate the activity of maybe a number of people, and that's to me what management is. And good management can benefit from good leadership skills. So you can be a better manager if you have leadership skills, and those skills would be, to me, the number one skill that needs to be developed as a leader as opposed to a manager is listening. And not just, yeah, I hear you, but listening for understanding, listening to incorporate others' points of view into your point of view, listening to understand what other people are really thinking, not just saying, and maybe probing and exploring meaning more than just listening. So I think that's primarily the difference between a leader. Now a leader gets out in front and demonstrates and shows those skills more than a manager does. And like I say, I think a good leader will also have to manage. So they're not exclusive of one another, but leadership is a very important thing to me. I think it took me a long time to figure out that I was just being a manager and not a leader. And when I realized the power of leadership in bringing different points of view together and forming an opinion that's this opinion, it's not my opinion, it's not your opinion, or it's not my solution or your solution, it's our solution, and that solution is going to be way better than anything that I can come up with, or that you can come up with, or that any individual can come up with. And that's what I think leadership is. It's being able to extract that other thing that isn't mine, that isn't yours, but it's ours. That to me the essence of leadership.
That's great, and I really like that distinction that they're not mutually exclusive in a way. I think that's fascinating and definitely hits home, especially for companies that do have kind of those distinct levels right within a company where you might see managers and then more executive suite leaders. um, what are some common challenges that you see leaders facing, and how do you see them kind of overcome those different challenges?
So it's pretty basic. The hardest thing to do are hard things to do. They're emotionally hard things to do, and typically we talk about firing somebody or letting somebody go or giving them the opportunity to do something else. Um, Things that are hard, and it might not be that. It might just be cutting cost in some way, or it might be doing something that you just don't feel comfortable doing. And those things are very hard to do. And one of the things that we do in the roundtable is hold one another accountable for those things that we really don't want to do, because we might be accountable for the organization,
Mhm.
but we're only accountable to the extent that we recognize our accountability. So if I
Mm,
start having doubts about the fit of a team member, or the success of a development project that should probably be killed, or a marketing exercise that isn't going well, I'm going to have difficulty in pulling the trigger on doing that, being the bad guy, or doing something that's distasteful.
mhm,
So being able to understand that, I think, and finding a mechanism that holds you accountable to do those things that are not palatable, I think is probably the main leadership failing, I guess, that I see out there. And so being able to do that is a strength.
mm. That's interesting. Um, do you have a particular story where maybe you learned this from your own experience, or maybe even from hearing a story of another leader that went through some of these challenges?
Well, sure. And just following on to that point, typically when there is an individual on the team that isn't fitting in or doesn't contribute as well as they could, or whatever, we'll spend all kinds of time trying to re-educate, or accommodate, or do things, and that's okay. I think you need to do some of that, but by human nature, we'll take that way too far. And I, I can't bring to mind one. There's many times when I've done that, and I was called by my mentor, stop being a white knight, he said, and I didn't really understand what he meant for a long time until I started coaching people to do those kinds of things. And quite often we'll have a discussion about, well, I've got this person on my team, and they're a really great guy, but you're, they'll say they're a really great guy, and there's a but coming, and it's the but that is the important thing. And so we tear that apart and say, well, is that but a big enough thing to get in the way of your mission? And quite often it's not oh yeah, but they work really hard and they produce a lot and they do this and they do that, but then they go out and they talk trash about the team, or they do something that's not within our culture, or within our cultural norms, and so they don't really fit. And maybe that's the time that you have to have the discussion about, well, maybe you don't fit here. Things like that. Um, Again, hard things to do. Um, and I've probably been more guilty of that in my career um, than many. I'm not a particularly decisive guy. I don't rule from my gut. I rule from my head, and if I can rationalize some way to do something, or not do something that I know I need to do, I'll try to
Mhm.
rationalize it. But really, I should be responding. My instinct is, well, not just my instinct, but our instinct in general will tell us long before our brain can rationalize our way through something that we need to do something, and we need to listen to that voice and act more quickly than we normally do.
Mm. That's interesting. So I know you're just kind of talking about some of the things that I guess have been learned in a way through trial and error or through mentorship. Um, have there been kind of stories of successes that you've seen that have actually worked pretty well, especially coming out of the CEO Roundtable group? Things that might have been rather a shared knowledge rather than learned by experience or by mistake?
Well, let me tell a story just to expand on what I just said.
Okay.
Uh, I and this is repeated several times. This scenario is we'll get somebody talking about the great employee, but and then something will happen, and it's happened 3 or 4 times now, just through this coronavirus situation where that's forced everybody's hand. And when you finally do pull the trigger on something like that, uh, the not only the wave of internal relief, but the feedback that you get from everybody else. So if you've got a team of people and there's one person that's causing you a little bit of grief, and finally something causes you to pull the trigger and invite them to do something different, um, the other people in the team will come to you and say, "Wow, that's what took you so long?" Kind of, and they all know it. In fact, 9 times out of 10, the person involved knows it's coming and are just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so it's a relief to them. It's a relief to everybody. So just not to belabor the point, but doing difficult things is a key, and feeling okay about doing those things, because you really are giving somebody the opportunity to be their best self, and maybe this isn't the right place to do it. Or
Mm.
so yeah, as far as successes go, when you can really winkle out the fact that a situation, and I've been talking a lot about personnel issues, but it could be a market issue, or it could be a development issue. This product is really, really exciting, and we've put a lot of money into developing it, but and so
Right.
examine that but and find out what is at the heart of that, and then do something about it. And you weren't thinking about it because you're rationalizing that we spent a lot of money on it and it's got a lot of potential, and but so it's looking for those buts.
Right. Right. That makes a lot of sense. I guess from that, do you find that there's kind of a shared common personality trait amongst a lot of the leaders that you're working with at the CEO Roundtable, or or I guess a little bit further than that, do you feel like some of those same traits are shared amongst the leaders, and therefore it's creating that environment where you can all kind of bounce those ideas off from each other?
Yeah. So it's an interesting balance, because you have to be an optimist, and you also have to be a skeptic,
Hmm.
because Murphy was right. In fact, Murphy was probably an optimist. What can go wrong will go wrong, and then some. And even the things that you think can't go wrong might go wrong. So you have to be able to look at all of those things and say, okay, what would I do if this happened? So you
Hmm.
have to be a bit of a pessimist and look for the worst case thing, but you also have to be an optimist. And I think the thing that balances those two ends of the spectrum is self-awareness. And you have to be aware that you're being an optimist and aware that you're being a pessimist. And today I'm going to put on my happy hat, and tomorrow I'm going to put on my Eeyore hat. And so it's self-awareness that I think is the most important factor here in balancing those things that you need to have to be a good leader.
Hmm. No, I like that and I appreciate it. I guess why are those so important within leadership? Being an optimist and a pessimist.
Well, because you have to be prepared for the worst thing that could happen. You have to have a contingency plan for the worst thing that can happen. But you can't if that's what you plan for, that's what you're going to get. So you have to be able to plan for a good thing, and you have to be able to communicate, that this is our direction, this is our vision, this is what we could be, this is what we're striving for, and you have to really believe that that's possible. At the same time, you have to be able to look underneath and say, okay, at what point do I pull the plug, or at what point do I change direction, or at what point do I get everybody together and have a heart to heart, and exercise the the value of the team in replotting a new course.
Sure, sure. And I think that makes a good point, especially kind of leading into where we are today with, this global pandemic that's happening right now. There have been relatively good times, in my view anyways, there have been good times to be a leader leading up to, about a month ago or so, once the pandemic it became a pandemic and hit the US. Talk to me about kind of leading through these weird times of adversity, and what are some things that you would advise for leaders as we're going through these, these unprecedented times?
Well, leading through crisis is not unusual. The size of the crisis might be unusual in this case, but there are always crises to get over in leading a business. So, but like I say, this is unusual in its size and scope. So it calls on some leadership strengths that we might not have had to exercise before, or might not have exercised for a long time. I think we developed a little checklist of things that we should make sure that we do in every message that we give to people or give to the outside world. And the checklist starts out with accuracy. So is what I have said accurate? Do I know it's accurate, or is it hearsay? Or sometimes nowadays we can't always tell, but we need to be aware of how accurate our message is. The second thing is it relevant to us? And if it's not clear how it's relevant to us or the message that we're trying to give, then make sure that we do the appropriate interpretation. This is important to us because, and then make that clear. And then in these times, we've all got a lot on our mind, business-wise and personally. And so it's important to recognize that, to be empathetic. So was my message accurate, relevant, and was I empathetic? And finally, you need to be appropriately encouraging, because it's easy to get discouraged here. The world is turning to crap, and nobody really knows how this is going to end, or what it's going to look like when it does. So, but we've faced challenges before. This will not be the last challenge that we face, and we're strong. We're smart. We work well together. We'll get through this. And in fact, if we can do a better job of getting through this, we'll be better off than others who were not so skilled and optimistic, I guess.
That's interesting. Talk a little bit more about that. I mean, I think leading in a time when things are good, or even if you're experiencing small crises, is one thing, right? But leading when we're dealing with such a big pandemic at scale, like you mentioned, it's going to the tide's going to come back, and it's going to show who's skinny dipping, right? I think that was a quote from Warren Buffett. Talk a little bit more about that. Like, as a leader, what are things that are going to really come out as a result of this pandemic and what's happening?
Well, people are stepping up. People are showing their worth. There are companies may have to cut salaries and ask for more contribution. So people that do that will show their worth, and people that don't will show their worth. So there's that. This is a great time to manage your relationships with coworkers and family and everybody else. It's time to ask for favors. It's time to grant favors. We have companies who are not able to pay their bills, and as a creditor, I'd be happy if they called and said, you know what, I'm not going to be able to pay my bill this month, but I will get to it, when things settle down, or next month, or whatever. But just talk to me about it. Don't just go away. Acknowledge the situation, and as I said in them talking about messaging, be transparent. This is hard on all of us, and I don't have the answers, but I do know that we have the skills and the ability and the tenacity and whatever it takes to get through this. So stick with it. We'll all be in this together. And I've seen teams just do incredible things, roll up their sleeves and dive in and do things that is not in their job description, and they don't get paid for, and they don't maybe even get recognition for. But when there is adversity like this, and it's shared adversity, and we're all in the trenches together, I think it's a basic human nature that we want to look after one another. And if you let that happen and encourage that and acknowledge that we don't have the answers, but we know what the right things to do are. So let's just keep doing those right things until the answers become clear.
That's great. Do you think through this exceptional adverse time right now, do you think that this is going to actually put a spotlight on the good leaders from the great leaders, and kind of showing how big of a gap it actually could be between them?
Yeah, I do. I think that the people who look after their relationships and look after their teams and look after their people, that are transparent and forthright and appropriately encouraging, I think they'll gain out of this, and those that don't will lose. And to my point, I've got IT companies in my group, and they said, well, just 3 weeks ago we couldn't hire a good person. The market was so tight that we just couldn't hire them, and now we're thinking about laying them off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, water under the bridge doesn't matter. It's what we've got today. And now, so how do you deal with that? And so many of them have come up with creative solutions and say, well, rather than lay 3 people off, let me just ask for people to take a salary cut, or to have a flexible work schedule, or take some vacation, or do something different, do something creative to keep the team together. And we get back stories of people who have been way generous and say, you've got a kid at home and I don't, so I'll give you my vacation time, or I'll take a salary cut, you don't, and just people have stepped up like that. And boy, that's going to be remembered on the personal level and on the business level. If a company is willing to provide service that is needed, without the certainty that they'll get paid for it, or get benefit from it, I'm certainly going to remember that, and I think everybody else will. So I think it's a time of reckoning. I like the skinny dipping analogy. I think you'll a lot of not misdeeds, but I think good leadership will carry a lot through this whole thing, and people will have a benefit.
Sure. That's great. And I think what I find fascinating about this scenario as well is just how willing people have been to step up, and even companies are completely like manufacturing companies shifting to producing masks and medical base equipment to be able to help provide the essential needs of the healthcare workers, really, and even some non-essential or like non-medically based workers as well. Do you think that those companies are going to have an upper hand after this coronavirus is over, and kind of be remembered by that? And some of those decisions those leaders made to make that happen, or not?
I can't see how they will not gain from that. It's there's the lion with the thorn in his paw, and I don't know the story, but the mouse that pulled it out didn't get squashed. I think that's going to be the case. I think as you said, people are stepping up, and I feel very grateful for the people that have stepped up on my behalf, and whenever there's an opportunity to step up on somebody else's behalf, I hope to be able to do that. And I think companies that get out in front, I think they'll be remembered. And I know banks right now, for instance, are under a lot of stress to process applications for the subsidies that are available now. And there are some who are taking non-customers. I can see their desire to treat their customers first, but also to close the door in a sort of a time of need. I'll remember that. I'll remember the bank that said no. We're going to look after our own first. I'd be comfortable with an answer. We'll look after our own first, and then we'll look after you, or we'll do the best we can. But just to close the door, I'll remember that. I'll remember that.
Great. So I guess with that, we'll shift away just from the coronavirus and just zoom out a little bit. Do you have any tips for leaders who are looking to just generally improve themselves? Like, what's something that you would tell an aspiring leader, or a leader who wants to become from good to great, as an example?
I think the number one skill, and I alluded to it earlier, is listening. And not just listening to hear, but listening to understand. And be aware that your listen to talk ratio should be at least 3-to-1. And maybe even bigger than that, if you can make it bigger than that. But the other thing to know is that when you're talking, the clock runs faster or slower. I don't know which way that goes, but it seems if you talk for 10 minutes and then you look at your watch and you say, oh my God, that felt like 2 minutes.
Right.
So if you can be quiet most of the time and let other people encourage people and ask people to talk or to converse and encourage conversation, not just talking.
Sure.
Then I think that's the number one skill that is lacking in most leaders that I see.
Okay, I like that. Do you have any other tips or recommended books or things that you feel might be helpful for people who are looking to learn more and
Sure.
engage?
The other thing that I wish that I had done more in my career is trust my gut, because I had a feeling about something long before I was able to process it. So if you're feeling uncomfortable about something, just dive in and explore that a little bit and find out what it is that's bothering you about that. And usually it's something that you're going to have to do that was not comfortable to do. And so you just kind of distance it a little bit. There are lots of good books on leadership. And I get excited reading each one, and you think, yeah, this is the one. The one that has stuck with me the longest is Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And I saw him speak once. He was asked, why did you call it the 5 dysfunctions? Isn't that kind of negative? He said, yeah, but nobody would buy a book called The 5 Functions of a Team. You know, it's just not exciting. So he does it from that point of view. But the framework that he puts around leadership is in teamwork is really very clear and easy to understand and communicate. And he does it in almost a novel, a little novella, a story about a company that illustrated what these different behaviors were like. And the fundamental thing that he talks about is establishing trust. And it's not the kind of trust that is transactional trust. It's not that I trust that if I leave you my car to work on, that you'll work on my car and fix it. Not that kind of trust. It's the kind of trust that allows you to, and I don't want to get too graphic, but to get naked, to get emotionally exposed, or to be able to say what might be a stupid thing, and know that the other person will accept that and digest it and not use it against you. And so there's that sort of a emotional trust. And what that allows you to do then is have constructive conflict. Because if you and I think the same, then one of us is not necessary, if we always agree. So we have two different points of view, and having trust allows us to have a debate about your perspective and my perspective, or my idea and your idea, and then probably come up with an idea that is better than yours or mine. Mm-hmm. And that then allows us to have accountability for what it is that we come up with. So if you have said what you think, and you know that I've heard you, and we decide to go off in a different direction, then you're more likely to be able to get behind that decision, because you know that we've all considered one another's point of view, and we can be accountable for that. And then that allows us to focus on a thing that is not yours and not mine, but is maybe the company's objective. Mm-hmm. So it's the focus on the actual desired outcome that motivates us, not my ego or your desire for promotion or whatever. It's a real, true reflection of the mission of the organization, and that's what gives us joy. So running up that pyramid, and I forgot one of the rungs in there, but the point is that starting with trust, and that's what most teams don't have, and what most leaders need to spend the most time in developing. So once you have that trust, and it might be exercises, it might be offsites, it might be just discussions, and it might be changing out the people on the bus, as Jim Collins says in his great leadership book. You have to have the right people on the bus. So I think that's my favorite, and the one book that I usually go to whenever there's a management issue to deal with, and it's usually that trust issue that isn't there, that doesn't allow the other things to happen. And so Patrick Lencioni, I recommend him.
There we go. I love that. I want to dive into that just for a second, because it sounds interesting, and obviously a great foundation for leadership, of course, is having that trust. How do you think great leaders can actually build that trust? What are some of the things that can help make that the foundation of the team?
The only way to do that, in my experience, is to lead by example. And so to be vulnerable, and then see what happens, and deal with that. And if people see that you're willing to be vulnerable as a leader, then they're more willing to be vulnerable. And if the team then can sort of rally around the vulnerable one and protect them from non-constructive conflict, I guess, or non-constructive input, then you start to build that understanding that it's okay to be vulnerable here. It's okay to be open. It's okay to be honest. It's okay to be stupid. I mean, not that we're stupid, but we all say stupid things. And if it's safe, if it's okay to say something that didn't make sense, or no, forget that. If you can do that, then you've got the basis for that trust, and that's a lot harder to do than to say. So sometimes if you take a team out of their work environment and give them an exercise to do, and I understand that some of these things don't work very well because they're not well constructed or they're not well analyzed afterwards. But to extract the team from its environment and give it a task to do that doesn't have a lot of import. So it's I don't know, passing a marble from one to the other, or ordering some cardboard squares on the floor or something like that. If you can abstract the exercise from the day to day, and then people will get into that and they'll get excited about that and they'll exhibit their behavior, and then you can back off from that and in a sort of safe environment because there's not very much at stake. Then you can analyze those things and you can say, well, when you said that, what were you feeling, and why did you do that, or why did you say that? And we can have that, what I call a meta discussion. It's a discussion about the discussion. And once you have the ability to jump out of the act and examine it from above, then you start to have the ability to time out. Let's talk about what we're doing here and how we're doing it, and how we're feeling about it, and all of those things. That's how you begin to build that trust. So start with vulnerability, start with some exercises, analyze those exercises, and establish a meta channel of communication that is different from the task channel. And understand that at one point you're talking about the task, and you can even do physical things like put on a red hat when you're doing the task and a blue hat when you're talking about the function of the task, or the execution of the task, or what it is that you're doing in the group. Or lean in when you're having this discussion, and sit back when you're having that discussion. Do something to signal that you're no longer talking about the task. You're talking about how we're doing at achieving the task.
That's great. That's great. Well, I know we gotta get ready to wrap this up, but I do want to just ask one other question. Then, what is one final thought that you would leave for leaders that you might want to share at this point? Anything about what we've talked about with coronavirus, or expanding on leadership knowledge? What's one thing you'd want people to take away from this?
Be visible. Don't go and hide. It's hard to be in front of a group of people, and at times like this, what I would like to do is get the whole company gathered together so that we can feel together and have a discussion. And there's technology that will allow us to do that, and we should exercise that. What we're doing at this point is we're having meetings, management meetings, or whatever other kind of meetings. We're replacing those meetings with technology. What we're not doing is getting in front of everybody, and email doesn't do a very good job of that. Even this medium doesn't have as much impact as being physically together, but it's the best we got. So don't forget to communicate to people. Communicate often, over communicate, and stick to the same themes. Make sure that you're consistent in your messaging, that we are facing a lot of uncertainty and a lot of mixed messages coming in every day, and something's changed since we've been talking. But if you can appear as in control, and not that you have all the answers, but we understand what's going on, we understand what we need to do, and let's get on and do it. And I understand that we feel bad about it, or we have feelings about it, but be visible and be consistent, and be visible. Just make sure that you're out there in front of your people and being visible.
That's great. Thank you. Scott, where can people contact you if they have any other leadership questions, or how can they find you online?
Sure. The website is ceo-roundtable.com. And you can reach me there, or it's scott@ceo-roundtable.com, ceo-roundtable.com. And you've done such a good job of digital marketing. We pop up at the top of the page when you search for CEO peer groups or CEO roundtables. So thank you for that. And if you forget
Thank you.
any of that stuff, you can just do a Google search for CEO roundtables in the Boston area, and there we are.
Perfect. Well, Scott, thank you so much for being here and for answering these questions. And yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. Make sure to stay tuned for any upcoming episodes on our YouTube channel. And Scott, thanks again. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Devin.